All right, welcome back to the channel. So, dude, it's been like 2 weeks since I've been out here and messed with this thing. So, come out here this morning and decided that I would clean up a little, straighten up some stuff, and try to do some odds and ends on this thing maybe. And I don't know, not even really make some progress because we ain't getting nowhere, but do some odds and ends. So, put the little brake line fittings in. They look really good after everything's painted. So that's how they turned out, you know, just like on a factory car. You got the little clip and everything they go through welded into the tabs. So that's really nice because this is literally the current setup. This was just like zip tied up here. So it's going to be really nice to get these lines bent up where they run to the actual tabs, where they're actually tabbed on the frame. You know, look slightly professional. So I'm gonna have to get probably it's a little bit shorter brake line. I might have some in there. But yeah, that's what I'm gonna do this morning is I'm just gonna kind of mess with some of these little odds and ends, get my brake master cylinder, reservoir mounted back up, you know, switch out some little things. We got our clean up stuff and still got to grab some touch-up paint to do the edges and odds and ends. But I think I'm just gonna kind of mess around out here for a few minutes this morning. Honestly, I don't even want to be out here to tell you the truth. I've got in such a grind mode at the shop, busting tail, 12-hour days, trying to get ahead, that it's like I switch my brain back and forth. And so I get in this grind mode where all I want to do is be seriously working. And so if I'm not literally working on my business, then I almost feel depressed. So it kind of don't even feel right to be out here, but I'm pushing myself to come out here and make a little bit of effort. That way I know next week I'm gonna be right back on grinding at the shop and pulling them 12-hour days again all week, every single night next week. And you know, I just don't want it to creep up on us where we get this thing back from TKM and then we still have a ton of stuff to do in the car. So I'd love to get this thing back as a roller and be able to, when we get it back from TKM, focus on the motor. So I still have a checklist of things to do on just what we have here now. I went and put the steering rack on earlier, and of course my bolts, you know, they moved, they pulled when I welded them. So it's always something, man. I'm telling you, I've just been getting my teeth kicked in, man. I didn't weld it with, you know, the rack on there. I probably should have put better tacks with the rack on there so the bolt didn't move or pull, but it is what it is. I took a sledgehammer, tried to beat them over, put a nut on the end of the bolt, try to hammer it over to protect the threads, and they are just really rock solid. So it looks like we're gonna have to bring the Porter power home from the shop and put it in there with the attachment to spread it and spread the bolts, attachment bolts over. I mean, it barely needs to be moved. We're talking like 1/4 of an inch. You know, it needs to be spread, and the Porter power will just bend the bolts right where they need to be. I think the inner spread, you know, from the inside, I'm all backwards, from the inner spread of the bolts, I think them are correct. It's just the outers, so the tips of the bolts where you start at, you know, bent in. So if you bend the tips out, then as it slides on, the inner measurements when it's actually on is perfectly fine. It's just them outers, the bolts pulled. So that's something you got to pay attention to when you're welding. I'm not a professional welder, so I still forget them kind of things. I want to clean up, like I said in a previous video, a little bit on this jumble of stuff right here with all this brake stuff. And then we actually are going to be doing something up here. You guys might already know. We got a package in the mail down here. So I don't know if we're going to get to that today, but we'll see what we can get done. Weather's nice out. Got the door open, about to open the front door probably. And try to make myself work on this car a little bit. All right, so we're making a little bit of progress, a lot of boring stuff that probably a lot of people don't care about, but we got our master cylinder reservoir back mounted, so it's way cleaner this time, mounted to the firewall. I had to bend and fold the tabs over, so we're gonna have to go back and just do a little touch-up paint on that, which I already told y'all that we would be doing touch-up paint on, like around that. And that just got to grab the stuff from Advance. Went ahead and painted our brackets this time for our fire system. So these were just raw aluminum that I had bent in the vise, and they look really tacky. So we redid our decal up here, cleaned our cowl all up, got all the crap off of it, and then redid this, redid our fire lines, got them bent more symmetrical, and then even put a little tiny piece of rubber in here to keep them from rubbing this time, so not as rushed. So I like the way that looks. That turn looks way better. Working my way over now, painting the brackets for the fire nozzles that point and hit the side of the motor, like the headers area, the side of the heads. Got them outside drying, running them. Got all the brake lines taken apart, so the one that crossed over, got it pulled off. And now about to start trying to bend up some other ones. So we just cleaned up some of this simply, like this one, for instance, was ran here, like looped around and inside. And so instead, just a quick loop like that, changing the sides, cleaned it up a ton. You know, I never was 100% happy with that, but, you know, I was trying to just get stuff done. I don't see no point in taking something apart and not improving. It's not really my style. If you're going to take something apart, you might as well go ahead and improve any areas that you failed in before. So this is how this was. As it's like that. I mean, look how terrible that is. I mean, it works, but it's just tacky. So I've never liked it, but I had to bend this by hand and with a screwdriver, and I couldn't bend it any tighter radius than that and get it to look good. So that's what we are about to work on. I wanted to move, you know, some of this around, but I think this is not a bad layout at all, because, you know, you can reach up in the inner fender and turn your portioning valve if you need it. You might not even need it. We went back and forth about that in previous videos. And then your line lock, it was not hooked up when the car was wired. You know, it was ruled or figured out that I wouldn't need the line lock. I think this go around, I am going to go ahead and wire it myself though, so that it's there. We do have all the wires all the way into the car under the seat, but it's just never done. So we're just going to clean the lines up. We're going to keep this laid out. We'll touch all this up with a little bit of black brush paint whenever we get to that point. That's what we're going to work on right now. I had ordered this. So this is a brake line bender. I'm sure everybody knows what this is. I knew what it was. I just never wanted to order one. I went ahead and ordered it this time. That way I can make these a lot better. So I'm going to work on this line first, try to figure it out on the scrap piece before. I mean, I got a ton of scrap. I got that whole piece laying up there that I pulled out from across the car, but I'm gonna just go ahead and use this and see how tight I can bend stuff, you know, kind of play with it. You know, I'm thinking coming down and then a 90-degree over and another 90 if it'll work, you know, or maybe I'll have to loop again. I'm not really sure, but I'm gonna play with that one. I could also turn that fitting actually instead of going down. I don't know, but that's what I'm messing with right now, is working on these brake lines. Also went ahead and got the wiring back on, all zip tied nice and neat. This time it's ran underneath there, tucked up nice and neat. Just doing a lot better job this time on assembling stuff than before. Went ahead and put one of my brake lines on this side, so this thing is way better than it was before. And the tire is not going to hit that or anything. You know, your tire will be way over here. And it doesn't touch, doesn't get close, will never move or anything. And then we just hardline. We'll hardline from this back up to here, whereas before we had braided line. So let me keep getting at it. All right, so here's what we got. Looks pretty good. That one was already there. This is our new one, and then this little guy right here is our new one. Now making this little guy right here was extremely difficult, just because of the size. But the tube or the sleeve doesn't want to slide around this tight bend, so it's really hard to do the end. And then making this one also, you have to, I bent it to make it, and then I had to basically unbend it pretty much to a 45 to get the sleeve to slide down enough to do the end. So really difficult. It definitely took a couple of hours. By the time, you know, figure out how to lay all this out. First, originally I had did this one like curled up, try to curl it to get it to go in there, and I clocked the fittings different and all that. So a lot of playing around just for these two little simple lines, you know. I know a lot of y'all can understand. However, this has been a whole weekend struggle. So started out, I did, you know, what I showed you in the clip previous. And then I was watching a video and I was like, crap, I was trying to figure out these flares down here, because these are inverted flares. And so I was just refreshing my memory on what an inverted flare is to make sure I don't mess up. And then that's when I stumbled across, you know, or it popped back into my head, you know, the double flare versus the single flare versus the bubble flare. And when you're dealing with these down here, you know, normal vehicles, which is what 95% of the stuff on YouTube and the internet is everybody says, you know, you must use a double flare. Whenever you do a single flare, you stretch the material around it and it gets really thin, and the single flare can just break right off. And then you would obviously lose brake fluid everywhere and lose your brakes, and you could kill yourself or somebody if you don't have a parachute. If you have a parachute, then obviously if you throw a parachute should stop you. But you, I guess, always shouldn't depend on the parachute. You should have good brakes and parachute working together for safety reasons. But so I was like, I'm using AN tube sleeves and tube nuts that go over the line. So you put the tube sleeve on, or the tube nut on first and then the tube sleeve, and that's what makes your end. So this is what a tube sleeve and a tube nut looks like. And most of y'all will probably know what this is, but when I first started out doing this project, I did not know what this is. So I'm gonna just touch on it real fast in case somebody's new to doing brake lines on their race car and they don't know what this is. So you would slip your tube nut over first and then your tube sleeve. Your tube sleeve is what actually has, it has, you know, the degree, the bevel on it, as you can see, if I can get it to focus. Okay, it's beveled right there on the end, and then you flare the end of your line. And when you flare the end of your line, the end of the line flare sits inside of this beveled end right here to match the flare. So this sleeve gives this line support, and then your tube nut goes up like this, okay, up to the end. This slips down in there in a perfect world when you're not using two hands. And then you will actually get this thing to focus. You'll screw this onto the brake line, and then that's what leaves you with it looking like that. So there's a tube sleeve that pulls on, that pulls it up tight. Now these right here that I'm using are from Speedway Motors. There's the part number for anybody who wants to look these up. You know, as you can see, they're AN stainless steel tube nuts, and they come with the sleeve and the nut, most of them. Just verify that they come with both. This part number, I believe if I got this correct, that's the reason why I did this part number, so I can reorder if I need them. I believe this one will come with both of them. So I was like, crap, that needs to be double flared. Even though I was pretty sure when I bought this, which was like 2 years ago, I think, originally when I did my first order, I swear I remember looking into all this and that it needed, you know, I went with the single flare for a reason. So I was double checking myself and everything was coming up, you know, double flared, not single flared. And so I come in here and took out this little line right here that it goes up like this and into here. It's a hard line to make because of how short it is and tight it is. The original one was even tighter. I got this one a little bit bigger. So I cut it in half, took my tube nut, two sleeves off, and went to double flare another one. Put all my stuff together, looked at it, and I was like, man, that looks like a bunch of material up inside this little AN fitting. I was like, it just don't look right, because you already have the tube sleeve, which is in theory, I guess, more material that kind of pushes up. I mean, when you flare out the brake line, it still gets thin, so you can't argue with that. But I was like, look, let me just stop. Let me go inside. Let me read on the internet. And let me make sure I get this right, because this is not something that I necessarily want to mess up on. You know, try my best to get it right. And so I started looking at trying to get information on the AN fittings, not just brake line fittings. Because when you look up brake line fittings, it's clear as day it needs to be double flared. Stumbled across a couple chassis builders that were advertising either the AN, or they were discussing the AN flares. It was either their product or they sell it on their site, you know, a couple chassis builders. And the ones that I've seen said always use a single flare when you're using the AN tube sleeves and the tube nuts. So I don't know if everybody's gonna bombard the current comments now that it's completely wrong and I'm gonna kill myself, or I don't know what's gonna happen with that statement. But from everything I gathered on Google with the search is that you're supposed to use the single flare. If that's wrong, you can go ahead and correct me now, that to save somebody else. And if you are watching this video and trying to do your own project, please skim the comments real fast to see if at a later date, if we discussed any good information in the comments. Always go to the comments, because a lot of my viewers have really good information that we leave in the comments after the video is posted, obviously. So if you're new to the channel, always check the comments before you take something that we've done and duplicate. So that's what I've done. Everything is single flared besides these fittings right here, which are your traditional inverted, you know, double flared piece. So you can see right there, that's your traditional, what is that, 3/8 maybe, I think, you know, with a traditional end on it. And then this end's double flared right here. That goes to an AN braided line. But all of these AN tube nuts and everything, these are all single flared. And this is that little line I was talking about. It's complicated. Kind of runs up back there like that. It's a lot harder to make, especially this end, because of how you have to load everything up. And then you have to get your tool in here to make the flare and everything, and then switch it, flip it back forward. So it gets a little complicated. Not really happy with these lines, to tell you the honest to God truth. I'm happier with them than I was the first time, because obviously the first time it was zip tied up here and just kind of come down and was hanging. So I'm definitely happier with how these actually, you know, flow, you know, around stuff, and they just look a whole lot cleaner. I don't have so much lines rolled up. But when I went to run this one right here, you know, I was kind of like, man, looking at it like this, it's just so ugly. Having these two lines like this is so freaking ugly to me. This one, you know, should have ran up and doubled up and going there, or this one should have ran down, met that one, and doubled into here. But then whenever the problem is then when you get over here into this area, now you're dealing with some really tight 90s, because obviously this one needs to go up into there. Now, if I would have did this at a 90, then I guess the line could have come right here, and that line could have come right here, so they could have come like that and then went like that and tapered into each other maybe. But then you're stacking lines across each other. So there's just, how I've got it laid out, it's very frustrating for me mentally. But when the tire's on, engine's in, fender's on, you won't see none of that. So that's what I keep reminding myself. Everywhere it has went through something, such as this right here, it doesn't touch. So none of this is touching. Let me see if I can help show that. Just in case you're new to the channel and you're building your own project, it's very important to make sure that your lines go through, but they don't touch nothing, okay? And they are solid enough that it's not gonna vibrate and touch that, you know, the way it is. You don't want these things rubbing. They can't touch on these edges right here. You know, it can't touch up here on this edge. It's gotta be cleared. You've got to keep these lines where they're not rubbing against anything, or they will, the vibrations will literally cut them through. Like this one right here just floats in there. Man, I hate showing these close-ups. I hate all this little like chips and rust. I mean, but my car's just like a lot of y'all's, man. It's not perfect. So it looks good from far away, but it's not perfect. And I'm gonna do some paint touch-ups, but I'm just not there yet. So that line runs up and around the master cylinders. I do have a zip tie on that just to help with the vibrations and to pull it kind of tight against this little tab so that it's not really moving. But then it's also P-clamped up here. So I mean, this line literally does not move. And then it just runs up underneath that little lip and it's P-clamped. And then the same way over here, it runs through here. There we go, okay? So we are clearing all of that before somebody comments. I want, you know, to make sure that everybody that's new understands that your lines cannot be touching. Okay, if they touch anything that's sharp or any edges, they're gonna vibrate themselves and they're gonna wear a hole through the line. So all of this comes right here. Really probably should put another P-clamp right here. I just haven't went back and added it. I kind of just got this laid out. And I'm not happy with this one. So you can see how this kicks forward. I'm still learning where to put my 90 at, you know, in reference to this. So yeah, a little irritating, but I don't want to redouble flare all this and everything. And I figured I would leave this alone, because if I go to bleed the brakes and this fitting leaks, then that allows me to cut it off and do it like I want, which is, you know, slide your fitting more up into this curve as much as you can, cut it, you know, about right here probably, and do your double flare right there, and then slip that back down and drop this line down some. I wish it was a really tight 90. It would follow this right here and not be sticking up, but the little tool I have just does not make that tight of a 90, and I'm sure them tight of 90s like that are hard. And like I said, it's hard because you've got to remember that your little fitting, you've got to slide your fitting up out of the way and then do your work. So you have to do your flare and everything and then slide your fitting back. So you can't have where the 90 comes straight out of this and tight, which is like this would have to be. Like, you physically can't make that I'm aware of in your garage. I mean, you could buy, I think they make, you know, 90s that would convert this to where it goes in, and that probably would be 100 freaking times cleaner. But I have enough slack right here, whereas if I ever did want to order that 90 or anything, I could simply unbend this, move my bend down to here, and then come straight into that. But like I said, I want to leave all of this excess right here for right now, just in case it leaks, and then I have to redo it. That way I don't have to do that whole line, because that's a long line. So I have enough to cut this off and change the way everything is. Same thing on this side. You know, I don't like how these are up above this line. This stuff really freaking irritates me. I'd rather this be into the corner and go straight, but we're gonna make sure this don't leak. It's gonna get covered up by the fenders and everything eventually. And this side is way better than that side. Look how tall that side is right there. So way worse over there, but it'll get covered up. Wheels, fenders, engines, you won't see it later on. It's just, you can see it right now, which irritates me, along with all of this not being painted. So lots of aggravation going on. I've painted my my other brackets for the fire nozzles. Originally, I was going to build some new brackets I had said in the previous videos and basically come out like this and then try to twist them at an angle. But I have since decided I think I'm just going to nut cert them like that. Put a nut cert on top of the tube, even though I really don't freaking want to. That's the reason why they're not drilled yet. My brain is still working. But I know that that's going to be the best bet, is just a nut cert them like that. That way you can change the angle of this a whole lot better by just bending this right here. And you don't have to do this funky flat stock that's then rolled, which is a lot harder then. But that would just be better, because I'd rather not put a freaking hole in my tube. But I don't know. That's something I'm still battling with. Besides that, I think we're caught up. So that's pretty much been my whole freaking weekend, man. And like before, when I had this brake line, it ran up underneath here and tucked tight and come out that side just like it does over there. But then when I put this brake master, you know, the brake reservoir here, this side over here is so tight underneath there to the cowl that it's actually touching. The mount is touching, not the bottle. I made sure the bottle wasn't touching, so again, it can't vibrate and rub a hole in itself. So to make the bottle as level as I could, since that cowl goes at a 45, and I didn't feel like busting the grinder off and grinding some of that tab down. It's a little harder here at the house because I don't have all the hand tools I do at the body shop. But, I mean, when you look at that, that looks decently straight. You can tell it's obviously leaned out that way a little, but not enough to necessarily bug the piss out of me. So all of that this time is nut certed to the firewall, and you don't have that little brake panel that we had on another one, because that and the brake lines really, or the fuel lines really aggravated me. And what I think I'll be able to do this time is get the fuel lines mounted off of these bolts a whole lot cleaner and tighter to the firewall, where they don't irritate me so much. I'm gonna be getting back to work on the shop stuff tomorrow anyway, so just trying to make a little bit of grounds. I was hoping to make a lot more grounds than I did this weekend, but at least we're starting to get the car put back together. We don't obviously have the motor. We went over the issues with the motor, but at least now we're starting to put the body of the car back together, because I want to get the wheels back on it and get it as a roller. Yeah, so where we're at. I've got to pull the OEM cluster out. I seen where somebody released on eBay a dash, a cluster insert for these cars that you can put the Pro Dash in, the 12.3 Pro Dash that I have. So this is what an OEM cluster looks like on these cars. If you're not familiar, it looks like this. There's the cluster. Okay, so that face, that cluster comes off, and I bought this one off eBay as a spare to cut up. Okay, so this is what this cluster looks like when it's taken all apart. And I was gonna cut this one up and actually fit this for a Pro Dash, but it is really tight to fit it. And then also you have this little trim piece right here, okay, at the top. That would get cut underneath it, and you would still kind of see that, which I guess you could grind that down. But it's just, it would take a little bit of work to get the dimensions right on that thing, and to build it using panel bond, and you know, where you basically are plastic welding back together. Plastic repair, the rigid stuff locally is about $80 a tube, and online I think it's $50 a tube. So you're already looking at least a whole tube to put all that together, where you could put the Pro Dash in there, fab something plus all your time. Somebody's selling them on eBay. I think I picked one up for 120 bucks. That is already ready to go. All I gotta do is paint it, bolt the screen right to it. It's for the Pro Dash, bolt it up on the backside, ready to go. So I gotta pull the cluster out real fast before I call it a night. And I've got a gentleman that is buying my cluster for $125. I think I paid about $125 for the new piece. I'm basically just trading it out. We're gonna move the screen off of the column into the actual dash. So I'll show you real fast how mine's done, in case you are new to this car. It's dark in here, but it looks like a dungeon. Ain't been in here since we blew it up. So my dash is mounted with a TRZ mount. If you need a TRZ mount, comment below so I can link up with you, and yeah, I can get you this for pretty much what I paid or a little less. What I paid for this is probably cheaper than what it is now, because I bought this before the pandemic, and so I know prices on pretty much everything has went up. But behind my Pro Dash is a freaking mint cluster, as you can see back there, that I restored, and you can't even see it. So Don't think there's no point in it, but you can see how freaking big the Pro Dash is compared to the cluster. So there's the edge of the cluster on that side, and on this side, the edge of the cluster is right there. And then you can see up there, up there. So it is pretty ridiculous. I don't even know how this gentleman has that thing where it fits in there, but it says for the 12.3 Pro Dash from Holley. So it's gonna be a tight fit, but hopefully it'll end up being recessed up inside the dash this time and not on the column. So you'll have a little bit more room, and then you won't have this little bit of play that this one has. But if you need the TRZ bracket, let me know, because I will be taking that off, selling it, and mounting the actual dash up inside of there like it's you know, like a lot cleaner. And actually now looking at it again, if I did take that bracket, let's pretend like this was straight and I bolted it to there. Okay, that's obviously, it's got to be angled down towards the motor. My motor sits pretty low. I don't have it in right now, but I know that it would at least probably need to be about like that to go down. When you look through the hole, that puts us dead in line with the shock limiter. So that's not going to work rolling it like that. It's going to have to be like this. And we'll just tuck it like that. That way, that puts us, you know, dead in line with the motor, and then we can turn it like this also if we need to be more towards the front of the motor. Or we can even turn it more towards the back. But I want to be kind of right there in the center of the motor. I know my cylinder 1 is in line with my spindle, or a little bit in front of my spindle, because I wanted the motor set back so far. It's crazy back on the firewall for weight transfer. But I know that it's right around there. So that means that the header area, valve cover area, the motor is basically from here back. So we are right above this limiter on the other side. So that is shooting us pretty much right in the center of the motor by the time you get the spread. And that's kind of also covering, you know, a little bit of the front area. So I think sadly that's just going to be my option, is to nutsert it to my tubes. For these fire lines, I use just a regular brake line cutter tool, and I barely put a turn on it, and I spin it around at least 1 or 2 times, and then just keep doing that. Just barely turn the knob. You want to be very careful, because these lines are actually lined with a metal sheathing, and then it has like this fireproof plastic, I guess, or fire retardant over the outside of it. So it feels like it's a plastic line, but on the inside it's actually metal. And then you'll get right down to that last little piece, and then when you tear it apart, the metal is cut, but it's just gonna have plastic. So then you'll just kind of deburr it, but you're not really deburring much because there's no metal there. It's really just kind of like plastic, honestly, like a lot of the stuff I see. And I just try to make sure that there's none in there that's going to clog the nozzle up on your fire nozzle itself. But you're not going to be able to get this perfect because the plastic just does not want to like really come out. But this is your life that you're playing with right here, so make sure you obviously spend a couple seconds and do the best you can, and then simply just put that in there first. Then I just kind of work the line. It bends really good. These lines, it's bend amazing. I think it's called a Lifeline system. I think that's the brand. I went over it in the previous video also. Man, I've went over so much stuff, which I know we have a lot of new people to the channel. Definitely go back and look at our previous videos, because there's a lot of information. My channel is all about giving out information, and I just want to tighten that down pretty decent so that it don't go nowhere. And I feel like that's nice and clean. This angle right here should get us at the fuel lines, which is about where I want to be at the fuel rails. And that's what we're left with, a real nice tuck wrapped around. Go in over there, again the same thing. It's just kind of free floating in there. I need to probably do something about it. I guess I'll zip tie it right there. I'll zip tie to them top tubes so that them things don't move around. I mean, that sheathing is really tough, you know, but I still want to make sure. It comes out of my car right here. It feeds out of the car to a T, and then that one goes to the passenger side, and this one goes to the driver's side. So we have 3. One that way, one that way, which should hit the fuel line area in the top of the motor, down on the headers, you know, that whole side and top, and then this should hit across the intake manifold, hopefully hitting towards the front radiator, all that stuff, and then kind of going across the top of the motor and running down all over the motor is how it should work in my theory. And I'm probably going to add one more inside the car I've got one up high that shoots towards my stomach and chest area, which is what I personally want, because I want to be coated in this stuff if I catch on fire. What anybody says, you should have your shield on and all that. I guess, yes, if you pull your shield up and you're on fire and then a nozzle squirts you in your eyes, yeah, that's not good either at all. But I have it where hopefully it hits here. I plan to, how do I say it, make sure I develop good habits of not taking my face shield off until the car's turned off. That way I don't get in a habit of opening face shield. I seen one other racer that was on fire. He had a habit of opening his race shield or his shield to get out of the car, and he did it out of, you know, muscle memory, and then it burnt his face. Whereas, you know, if you'll climb out of your car with your helmet on and your face shield down, then you hopefully will never pull it up if you're on fire. It just won't be instinct. So I already have one here. I have one on my feet because it's coming through the firewall. You don't want your feet burn up even though you still have a fire suit on. And then I'm thinking about having one that's kind of up above my head that shoots towards the dash to also help, you know, two different angles. I mean, I had the kit come with, I think, 4 or 6 nozzles for in the engine bay and 4 or 6 inside the car. So it was a very nice high-end kit, but I didn't need that much nozzles. I figured that use a couple less nozzles will hopefully make the foam last longer, because obviously if you're spraying tons of nozzle, it's going to eat up more foam more faster. So that's that. Brake line's done, fire suppression system back done. This is what I'm kind of hoping for with the oil filter this time, is like this. So I have these bar clamps that like we use over here for the water pumps. We set the water pump over there. The only thing, I know the distance like this will clear the motor, but the only thing that I'm in question of is I know my intercooler sits here and the piping comes out and curves, and I can't remember if it comes up and then dives up again, or if it curves at you know, the 180 and then kills up, or I can't 100% remember. I mean, it's laying on the back of the car, but I'd have to mock up all of that, and obviously I don't need to waste my time doing that when that can be easily moved. But I just kind of wanted to get a feel for it. So I think this time, this is where it's going to be. This is where it's going to go. These are kind of the things that you learn when I had to put this sensor in and mess with this sensor, this oil pressure sensor up there inside the belts and stuff. It's an absolute nightmare. And when we had these oil lines leaking on this filter housing, it was also a nightmare trying to get up inside there. So that's the reason why I wanted to move that off the engine forward. That's the kind of stuff you learn when you start working on the car, versus when you put it together, you think it's just, you know, perfect right there, nice and easy, and then it kind of gets buried. And this area between here is open space, because all we have is our fan shroud and our intercooler piping. So that's the only thing we have to clear it. We might have to rotate it like this, or flip it around on the inside, rotate it on the inside, or, you know, move it forward and backwards. But I'm hoping we can get it right there. The only other thing that we have to clear, which should be no issue, is the tire. Looks like we have tons of room, you know, with the tire. So I think that's how it's going to be. And then when you crack your filter housing open, it will actually, you can see the bar is there. It will just run down, and it should go straight into the pan. So it should drip out right there in between the clamps and clear the bar, make it nice and easy. Crack it open, it drains out straight down. It doesn't run down this way and get all over your hands, because I hate that more than anything. And then also, if you crack these lines open, they drip straight down. You can turn them without, again, them running all over your hands, because the fluids go straight down. So that's something you need to think about when you're mounting these things. Is it's annoying working in a normal daily driver car, turn the filter off and it going all over your hands. So if you can turn these things sideways, they still work perfectly fine, and easier to get to. And then also, like I said, it doesn't run all over your hands. And people in previous videos have asked about these clamps, where I got them from, and I sent somebody links. These are just, if you search eBay for like light bar clamps or roll bar clamps or roll tube clamps, anything like that, these are going to be for like side-by-sides, mounting accessories, and you know, light bars to side-by-sides and stuff like that. So just search for side-by-side clamps, roll bar clamps, tubing clamps. One of them keywords, Amazon or eBay, and you'll find all kinds of different ones. These come with these little rubber spacers in here that you can change it out for the different tube size, and then you can also get small ones. So there's a few different options. I use them to mount my switch panel up here in the top also, and I really like them. So I've even got smaller ones, and then I got one more bigger ones left. The name brand of these is called Lizard Go. So you could type that in if you're interested in getting some, but as you can see, I keep these on deck because I've went over it in the past. I'm not a big fan of welding tabs to stuff because then, like I said, like this, you can move stuff, you can move it around. We can switch this over there, water pump over here. And if we change water pumps from the one that we're currently using now, then we'll need different spacing probably, and you know, everything, so we can rotate that, move it, change it a lot easier than if you weld tabs and you got to do paint work. So I'm a big fan of tube clamps and not welding tabs. You know, of course, motor mount tabs we weld, but besides that, I try to make everything where it's universal. I can move it around, modify it as I'm working on it, and I'm not stuck with something. We'll move on to some other stuff next week, I guess. Like, comment, subscribe. We're gonna wrap this video up for this weekend. Thanks y'all for watching. If you got any questions or comments, drop them below, and I'll catch you on the next update. Thanks.